I mean, first and foremost, exercise is probably one of the best antidepressants out there.
Mm.
So again, I mean, doing that is great. I mean, just getting out there and exercising. I mean, we all talk about, especially from running, that runner's high. We feel a lot better. We may not feel like we want to go out there and start the run, but when we're done, we're like, yeah, this was good. I'm glad I did it. And you feel good the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Devin Haskins, and you're listening to the RVA Running Man podcast, a show discussing topics related to recreational running and fitness. In this episode, I speak to Dr. Mark Halstead of Washington University Orthopedics out of St. Louis, Missouri, and host of the Pediatric Sports Medicine podcast. In our conversation, we discuss tips for child teen runners, health impacts, and answer the question, should a child run a marathon? Runners, as a reminder, the content in this episode represents the opinions of Devin Haskin and his guests. It is for informational purposes only, not medical advice, so please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions or advice. Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mark Halstead of Washington University Orthopedics out of St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Halstead is the host of the Sports Medicine Pediatric podcast. Dr. Halstead, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So starting off, tell us a little bit about yourself, Mark.
Yeah, so I'm a pediatric sports medicine physician. So I trained initially in pediatrics, and I did additional training in sports medicine. So there's two types of sports medicine physicians out there. There's orthopedic surgeons that people kind of default to, and then there's people like me who, I kind of deal. I'm a kind of a jack of all trades. I can deal with the orthopedic and musculoskeletal injuries, but I also am very familiar with the medical side of sports medicine. So various medical issues that can contribute, your nutrition and all the other general medical health issues that affect you from a sports standpoint.
And what got you into wanting to be a orthopedic and pediatrician?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always loved kids. I mean, that's been a thing for me. I mean, when I started my training, I knew I wanted to go into pediatrics. I just wasn't familiar that sports medicine was an option. I met someone during my medical school training, and he happened to be a pediatric sports medicine physician. I'm like, oh, that's kind of an interesting combination. I like sports. I like kids. I've run for pretty much most of my life. I didn't start as young as you. I started at 12. That was my first encounter into running, and then have been a runner since. Just finished another half marathon just a couple weeks ago. So
Congratulations.
it's yeah, thanks. It's been a long journey, and I've been had some various injuries over the years too. I have some of what I call my old man injuries now, and then certainly had some injuries when I was younger too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a fun journey, and really enjoy working with athletes.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your podcast that you have, Pediatric Sports Medicine podcast.
Yeah, we the focus of that, we've been doing this. We're in our fifth year now. It's geared mostly for medical professionals, but certainly people who aren't in the healthcare field can get some benefit out of many of the episodes that we do. We basically talk about various hot topics in sports medicine. We certainly have covered running and running injuries on various episodes. We talk about pretty much anything related to the world of sports medicine and how that affects the young athlete.
Started running early when I was really, I was second grade. It was a PE teacher that I had that during recess, he used to run around the back of the school. And I just ran with him. We would run like 2 miles during recess. And I know a lot of kids thought I was crazy to go out there and run 2 miles with a PE teacher, but I found it fun.
Yeah.
But is there a specific age that a child or a kid should start or stay away from something like running?
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily say there's a specific age to start or avoid. As you mentioned, you had a very key word, what you said. It was fun for you.
Mm.
And I think that's the important part when we're getting kids into running, especially at younger ages, because you see every once in a while you'll get the lovely media article where a kid who's 6 or 7 has run with their family and they've done a marathon, and everybody gets all
Mm.
up in arms that this kid ran that young in running a marathon, and we can certainly talk about that a little bit if you wanted to.
Mhm.
But I think in the big picture things, the most important part, it's got to be fun. I mean, that's the thing for any sport. I mean, if you go out and you force a kid to do an activity, they're not gonna tie into that. They need to
Yeah.
buy into it. So you having a love for it, you enjoying doing it, even though all your other friends thought you were crazy for running 2 miles.
Mm.
That's good for you, right? But that may not have been good for one of your friends. So we don't want to force it on someone. We don't want to make it like, exercise is a punishment for them, or we're going to make the kid go out and run just to get fit. We want to find something that's fun for them, especially at those younger ages where that's really all that kids honestly care about. We think as adults that it's all the wins and how fast they can run and all those types of things, but the kids, when they come down to it and you ask them about it, they just want it to be fun.
Speaking of getting started, if a child or someone's kid would like to get started in something like running, are there certain health considerations parents should look at before giving their child the blessing of starting a cardio sport such as running?
Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure that obviously they don't have any pre-existing health conditions that would be a bad thing for them to start running. Some kids do have some chronic medical issues even at younger ages that running may not be the first thing that they should endeavor into. And that could be a whole host of different things. But obviously we know that physical exercise is beneficial to a lot of medical conditions anyhow. But running may not be the best thing for certain people. But, going back to what I mentioned before, what's their motivation? That's one of the things that we always talk about when again, the controversy comes up with kids running the much longer distance events is what was their motivation? Were they interested in doing it? Did they find it fun? Was it something they brought up rather than the family member bringing up? So we always want to find out what exactly is their motivation, especially again, if we're talking about someone that's in their grade school ages and they're wanting to initiate a running program
Hmm.
to start off with. That's where we have, especially when we talk about grade school, we have, two great programs out there. Most people are familiar with Girls on the Run,
Right.
which, has the benefit of teaching kids how to start to run and enjoy running, but also being a really positive influence for the girls that are involved.
Hmm.
My wife helped coach that. My daughter was involved with that. And then there's the counteract, which is not as popular. That's called Let Me Run, which is actually designed for grade school age boys, which has the same motivations as Girls on the Run, where these are boys who we're trying to get them interested in running, getting them physically active, if they don't have something else that they're interested in, but also preaching a lot of the positive things just about life in general, which I think is really important part of that age group.
Do you think there's a need, I guess, for a group such as Girls on the Run to be more involved in places like schools? Is that something that you feel like needs to be more integrated into our schools?
Well, that's where a lot of those programs start, is they're oftentimes school based, and then they have motivations and they kind of headquarter themselves at a school, and then usually it's a group of kids at that school that gets involved. So
Hmm.
I think there already is a component of that. I mean, we do know that physical education and PE classes in school, there's been significant decline in what that means and what that's involved compared to 20, 30 years ago.
Hmm.
It's a lot less strenuous, and there's a lot less of what we call fundamental movement skills of teaching kids how to move and to use muscle groups that they may not normally have done. And that's part of the problem with organizing activities, is that we've kind of gotten away from free play,
Yeah.
where kids would learn all those things and do those things, just by experimenting rather than having it all structured. And that's kind of the thing we have to be a little careful with. That's why an organization like Girls on the Run or Let Me Run are good things, because there's not a big driving force. This isn't a big competition. There is the race at the end that they have a goal running up towards, which is, again, how I approach things at my life. I'm not out there to win anything anymore. I'm
Mm.
there using this race as a goal for me to stay physically fit and go out there and actually have some carrot at the end to make me go out and exercise that I probably wouldn't do if I didn't have that carrot at the end of running this race. So I think getting kids interested at that early age, I think is a good thing. And that can be translated into all sorts of other sports or activities. I mean, one of the problems right now with youth sports is it is so structured. There
Mm.
is so many things that, it's pay to play and all this kind of stuff that's out there now that we've kind of really taken youth sports to a wrong tangent, that things like Girls on the Run, where it's much more lower key, there's not the big heavy competition involved. Those are the types of things that we need. We need more of this recreational type stuff rather than such all the highly competitive stuff, especially at these younger ages.
And speaking of making it fun, not everyone, running is not everyone's cup of tea.
Right. Right.
And for those kids out there that may could benefit from you said movement, more exercise, being more active. Are there some tips you have that a parent or a guardian may uh, do to get their kid more active and make exercising more fun?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's it could be as simple if you don't want to get your child involved in an organized activity, even like we've been talking about, Girls on the Run or Let Me Run or something like that. You know, let your kids experiment. Take them out to the playground and let them do stuff at the playground. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be all organized stuff. So let your kids experiment. Let them climb on things. Yeah, they may fall, they may break some things. That it's okay. They'll survive that. That's part of growing up. That happens. But in the big picture of things, we want kids just to be getting some level of not sitting down, reading and looking at their iPad all day long,
yeah.
sitting behind the game console. I mean, there are those things are fine in obviously moderation, but we do need to get kids outside. And again, does it always have to be something super physically active? No. I mean, if
Hmm.
the parent already has an interest in some physical exercise, well, maybe see if your kid has some interest in that too. Try and get some kids in your neighborhood to get together, maybe, have them play a wiffle ball game and something like that. It doesn't have to be, again, like I mentioned before, all highly competitive. Finding something that the kids like to do. I mean, again, when we talk about, I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s. So, we would go out and we wouldn't come home until the lights went off on the, or the lights went on the streets. And then, we'd come home for dinner.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, that light came on and you knew it was time to get home
That's right.
or you were in trouble, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Shifting gears into injuries.
Yeah.
One of the first injuries that I dealt with as this is right before I was a teenager and I was on my first track team, was a hamstring injury. I didn't know what that was. So ignorantly enough, I kept running on it and it just got worse. Um, what is some of the most common injuries you see or treat in a lot of our youth that you may see as a patient?
Yeah, and if we're specifically talking about running, I mean, there's obviously certain things that we see a lot of. We see a lot of knee pain. There's two types of knee pain that we see in our older kids. We tend to see what's called patellofemoral pain, or it's sometimes referred to as runner's knee, where their kneecap becomes painful from running. And usually the problem there is they've bumped up their running too much too soon. They oftentimes have strength issues in their hip muscles and their thigh muscles and some flexibility issues. And if we don't go into running with some of those things addressed, then we can start to overload the kneecap when we run. And so
Mm,
that's one of the things that we see in younger kids with knee pain. There's a condition called Osgood-Schlatter where there's a little spot where the knee grows from on the front part of the shin bone that can get overworked from too much running or jumping. So we see that a lot as well. In all age groups, we see stress fractures. So those overuse injuries of the bones. I had two of those in my running career. I had one when I was in high school, where they tried to make me both a distance runner and a hurdler at the same time my freshman year, and that just didn't work. That was too much pounding for my legs, and I got a stress fracture then. And then had another one in my 30s when I was doing a lot less impact on it. So those are common injuries for sure. Stress fractures. I usually joke with runners that if you run long enough, odds are you're probably going to get a stress fracture at some point.
mm,
And then we certainly see the muscular injuries like you talked about as far as hamstring injuries. We don't tend to see those as much in our younger kids because that's not their weak link. The weak link in a lot of our younger kids are their growing areas in their bones. And that's the things that we oftentimes see more injuries of. But as you get older, we start to see problems. And so when you talked about a hamstring injury and if you talk about a track runner, the biggest reason why we see so many hamstring injuries is because so many track runners are what we call quad dominant. So their
mm,
quads are super strong, the hamstrings are not, and they do this explosive movement and the hamstrings can't keep up with the super strong quad muscles. So when we think about strengthening, it's really important that we have the concept that we want to strengthen muscles on both sides of the body equally, so front to back and left to right. And if we're not, that's oftentimes how we run into a lot of these injuries. And that's stuff that we look for in our clinic when we're trying to identify, well, what was the reason why this thing happened? It wasn't just because they ran. Something was there that led them to get this injury. And those are the things that we're looking for.
Now, getting those type of injuries at an early age, are there any concerns of stunted growth or things that could affect the child long term?
Yeah, that's the big why old wives' tale out there is that doing things like strength training or too much running is going to stunt your growth, and that's never been shown to be the case. Now, there are some sports like gymnastics, as an example, that we do know that if kids start at a really young age and they're training for excessive amount of hours, and some of the issues that go along with that excessive training, that has been shown to sometimes delay the start of the growth spurt. But
Mm,
usually those kids will catch back up later on. We don't tend to see that in our runners, so that's not something we usually worry about. But it is talked about a lot, is because kids are growing. We got to worry about that we're going to stunt their growth, which is also a reason why a lot of kids, unfortunately, aren't involved in any strength training programs. Is because everybody says, well, you're going to hurt your growth plates, but that's actually not the case. And we actually encourage kids doing resistance training as young as 8 or 9.
okay.
And now kids in those age groups are not going to get the big bulk like we see in our adolescents once they go through puberty, but they absolutely can get stronger. And that strength is really crucial. I mean, especially if we're thinking about, sprinters or those types of things in track, that's really important, that strength. But it's also important in our distance runners too, just to absorb shock for long periods of time when they go out and run.
What are some signs that a child's training routine may be too much for them?
Yeah, and that, when you talk about training too much is when you start. I mean, there's several things that I see. One is kids who are getting hurt frequently. So if they're overtraining and and the result of that overtraining, they're getting lots of overuse injuries. Well, that's obviously an obvious sign that's there. But there's lots of other not obvious signs that would suggest that that kid either may be getting not interested in it, and it could be affecting their health as well. So, we could see kids that just they don't want to go out and work out anymore.
Hmm.
They're just saying, you know what, I don't want to do it. And when we see that, the question is, well, what do we do as a parent in that situation? Do we force the kid to go out and do their workout? Or do we ask and delve into that? What is their motivation to not want to go and work out? Is it because of something else that's going on with dynamics in the team? Is it because they're sick of it and they've been doing it for years and they don't want to do it anymore? And we have to think
Yeah.
about that sometimes, because a lot of these kids do get started at a very young age and they're burnt out by the time they're an adolescent because they've been doing it for a decade at that point. And we don't think about that as adults, but man, it's a long time when kids start in grade school and they get to the high school age. They've been doing their sport for a long time if that's that one sport they've been focusing on. So I think those are a couple of things. Certainly, there's other things we worry about as kids get into adolescence, especially our female athletes. If they're starting to lose excessive weight, if they're becoming obsessive about how much exercise they need to do, those are some red flags for us that they may be overdoing it, and that can cause some detrimental problems to their health if they're over exercising and losing excessive weight because of that, especially in our female athletes.
What are the benefits for kids that actually health benefits for kids that start exercising at a young age?
Oh, I mean, there's tons of them out there. I mean, we can give you a laundry list of stuff of the health benefit. Mental health. I mean, first and foremost, exercise is probably one of the best antidepressants out there.
Mm,
So again, I mean, doing that is great. I mean, just getting out there and exercising. I mean, we all talk about, especially from running, that runner's high. We feel a lot better. We may not feel like we want to go out there and start the run, but when we're done, we're like, yeah, this was good. I'm glad I did it. And you feel good the rest of the day. It improves your sleep. When you exercise, it actually gets you to the point where you actually can get to sleep sooner and sounder, which actually helps, you feeling more refreshed the next day.
mhm.
As long as you are giving yourself enough time in bed to get that sleep, which sometimes is a problem for a lot of our teenagers where they're up way too late and not getting enough sleep at night, which does actually increase your risk for injury. That's a we're really under recognized area of injury risk is sleep. If your young athlete is not getting the adequate recommended amount of sleep at night, it actually doubles their injury risk. So it is something that we don't
Wow.
talk about enough, but it is really important. So, most of our grade school and adolescents need, it gets a little bit less as we get older, but 8 to 9 hours of sleep at night, sound sleep, to be rested and recovered for the next day. Obviously, it increases your cardiovascular fitness. I mean, that's a no brainer right there. Increase your lean muscle mass when we're talking about those types of things. It increases your cognition and your mental being able to focus in school. We know that people who are exercising, our athletes, actually tend to perform better in academics than those that are not physically active. So there are benefits to your brain from exercising. So I mean that's just a few of the big key things that we talk about of the benefits of physical exercise.
Are there any pre or post, and this is specific to running, run routines that a child should do or teen should do to help themselves or prevent any of these common injuries that we discussed?
Yeah, there's not one magic and scientifically proven exercise program for a runner to do prior to exercise that's going to reduce injury. We talk about a lot, and again, the thing that, especially for muscular injuries, that people talk about all the time. Well, I didn't stretch enough before I went out and ran. That's why I pulled my muscle. That's not it. It's because the
Mm-hmm.
muscle was fatigued. That's actually the reason why. It's not has nothing to do with stretching. They've actually shown that stretching really doesn't truly reduce your injury risk. It improves your flexibility. And actually, interestingly enough, if you just stretch and you don't do any strength training, you do actually get strength gains because your muscle actually can work more efficiently. So you don't even have to lift a weight, and just by working on stretching, you actually get stronger. So that's a benefit of doing that. The part of the warm up, I think there's two important parts of that. One is, like we talked about before, is making it fun. So that's where we see a lot more dynamic warm ups. It's not the old where we just kind of sit out there and stretch. I still do those old man stretches for me, but we see a lot more dynamic warm ups now with athletes. We actually developed a program that we call the Runners 10 program through our Young Athlete Center here at St. Louis Children's Hospital. There is, for baseball players, as what's called the throwing 10, which is kind of a group of key exercises that we want people to do for just getting fit for their sport and injury prevention. So myself and some of our physical therapy people that we have at our center here, we
Mm-hmm.
sat down and said, well, what are the most common things that we have to fix when a runner comes into our office? And these are the things that we have to address in physical therapy. So maybe we just need to get those out there and have people start those and do that program as kind of part of your warm up, and thinking about that for strength training. So we actually created a group of 10 exercises that we feel, both from a strengthening and stretching standpoint, kind of combat some of the common ailments that we wind up seeing from running. And I can
Mm-hmm.
certainly give you information for the link to that,
Yeah.
because that is available online to people.
I know there's always been a war between whether a person does dynamic stretching versus static stretching. Um, is there a preference when it comes to a child or a teen when it comes to either of those stretching routines?
I think in the situation there, if you were going to have, especially a younger kid, if you want them to buy into doing the warm ups and stuff like that, I think it probably needs to be more dynamic, because
Okay.
that's something you can make them a little bit more active. They're probably going to buy into that a little bit more. It'll be more fun to them. Again, going back to that fun kind of theme that we had earlier. So I think if you're doing that, I think that's kind of the better option of the two, rather than
Hmm.
doing a simple static stretch. Now, again, there is some benefits probably to some static stretching out there, but I think if you want kids to buy in and make it more fun and actually seem like they're probably doing more like a practice in a way, the
Hmm.
dynamic stretches are probably going to be the thing that's the home run for most of the kids, especially the younger ones.
Okay. Um, Backtracking a bit, we talked about the controversy with the 6-year-old doing the marathon. What are your thoughts on kids that do venture out and do high distances like the marathons and ultra races?
If the motivation again is good, and that's the thing that I think would be the first question when I'm seeing a kid that's in single digit ages, they haven't reached the 10 and up yet, and they're gung ho, they want to do a marathon or a half marathon. Well, what is their motivation? Is it something they want to do? Is it something that their parents are trying to get them to do because they want them to be that kid that was the young one who ran the race, and get the attention from that? Or what is it? So if I have a family that comes into my office and they're wanting to ask about that as far as what's the appropriate way to do this,
Mhm.
that's going to be my first thing. I'm going to sit them down and say, whose motivation is this to do this? And having been a race director, when we look at younger kids that are wanting to run those races, that's something that we will reach out to the families about, and talk to them about. Because again, we want to make sure that it's safe for them, and the kid isn't going to be like, it's not going to be a burden on the kid. But one thing I
Right.
always turn around that we talk about, and this is the thing that drives me nuts. The most popular sport in our country and youth is right now is soccer.
Mm.
And if you look at soccer athletes, okay, and you actually put monitors on them and see how much, like a midfielder, as an example, will run in one game, we're talking 5, 6 miles
Yeah.
at least in one
Yeah.
game. What are our kids doing in a weekend? 5 or 6 games. So, but no one puts a stink up about how much running those midfielders are doing over that tournament of the weekend. But then we get all excited when a kid goes out there and they run this marathon because, again, they're the only person that's probably doing that. But we've got
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of kids who are doing that on a weekend to weekend basis around our country and around the world for that matter. And we don't see issues because of that. So, and the nice thing is Dr. Bill Roberts, he's a colleague of mine. He's up in Minnesota. He oversees the Twin City Marathon. He's actually published several studies that has shown he's actually tracked youth runners that have run the Twin City Marathons. He's actually found that they have a lower injury rate than the adults do for the ones that have completed the event. So
Wow.
we do have good research out there that show that it's not detrimental to these kids. Again, but the big thing is the motivation. So if they have the right motivation for it, if we look at our high school athletes that are running in cross country, the miles they're putting in a week are probably a lot more per week for training for 5K races than a lot of adults do recreationally to train for their half marathon and marathon for the races that they're doing recreationally a couple of times a year, perhaps.
Getting back to injury, for a child is dealing with any type of injury, at what point do you feel that they should come into a specialist such as yourself to be checked out and seen? But what point should a parent bring them in if they're complaining about any type of injury that they're dealing with?
Well, if a kid starts complaining, usually something's up. A lot of parents will blow that off and say, "Oh, they're just a complainer," things like that. But most of, especially our younger kids, they don't have that ulterior motive there.
Hmm.
Most of them don't. So if they're saying that something hurts, probably something does hurt. So I say number one, take it seriously when they're mentioning it to you and follow up on it because they may not mention it all the time, but it's still probably there. I think definitely pain that's persisted longer than 2 weeks, I think is always probably something that's at least worthwhile to address. I mean, I see unfortunately a lot of kids in my office who have been dealing with problems for months and months that we probably could have addressed and fixed much sooner. If they would have come in sooner, I think that's sometimes a little bit of a fear too. Is if kids are in the middle of a season, they don't want to come into the doctor because they're worried we're going to say they can't do stuff.
Hmm.
But if you come into someone like me, that's a sports medicine doctor. I mean, our goal is to be able to find ways to able to keep you participating as long as it's safe. And that's the big thing. If it's not safe and there's potential for further harm, well, then we're going to have to back off on stuff. But if it's something that we can work around, there may be ways that we can make people still participate in various sports and activities, including running, that may not cause more problems for them in the long term. So I think that's another motivating factor why people don't get seen. Certainly, if a kid is limping, if we're talking about running and they're altering their gait because of that, that's
Yeah.
definitely a red flag. You got to get that kid in and get them seen because something's up. Kids aren't going to just again limp for fun. They're going to limp because something's really hurting bad enough, and then that's how we can start to snowball into a lot of other issues. Because if they're already limping from one problem, they keep pushing through that. Now we've created another problem because another area is kind of compensating, and then we've got a whole mess of stuff we have to fix. Then.
What are some of the most important things a child or teen should do to make sure that they're keeping themselves healthy and injury free?
So for me, especially for a runner, the first thing is making sure they have some sort of strength training they're doing. Because time and time again, the problems I see in my office have a lot to do from lack of strength. And people think of that weird. They come in my office when I tell them that their child has a weakness in an area. Is they're like, well, my kid's exercising all the time. They're exercising 5 or 6 days a week. Why are you telling me that they're weak? That doesn't make sense. But then I also tell them, well, what are we doing to actually make the muscle stronger? Like the way we build strength, like shock absorbing strength, is through resistance exercises. When we go
Hmm.
out and run and we're doing endurance, we're building our endurance muscle fibers, which are different than our shock absorbing muscle fibers. So our endurance muscle fibers are the ones that let us go. Those are the ones that we develop as we go out for and run for long distances. But those are the slow twitch fibers. And so we need the other ones too that are helping to absorb shock. And that's again a big area that I tend to see in running
Hmm.
that's neglected is strength training. So that's always my
Wow.
number one wish list is making sure that kids are doing strength training. Second part is footwear, making sure they've got the proper footwear, making sure that it fits properly, it feels good when it's on. I sold shoes when I was in high school and college is one of my ways to get me through and get me some extra spending cash. And so I'm pretty familiar with the shoe world out there. I'm kind of a self-proclaimed shoe geek. And so I have a lot of interest in that. But again, I see a lot of poor choices for footwear. And again, as I stress with everybody, there's not one magic shoe that's the best shoe for everybody.
Hmm.
It should fit right. That's number one. And it should feel good when it's on. Those are the two things I tell everybody. It doesn't matter if it's, the fancy Nike $290 shoe that's out there now, or if it's, your basic entry level running shoe, it should fit good and fit right and feel good when it's on, and making sure that we're replacing that at appropriate intervals and they're not wearing them out. I think that's an important part for that. But I think those two things to me are still kind of the two big keys. And again, my big wish list is just making sure more runners are doing more strength training on a regular basis rather than just going out there and running it regularly.
It's good tips. Well, Dr. Halstead, thank you for this conversation today. I think it was really beneficial, and good luck to you and all you do. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Special thank you again to Dr. Halstead for joining today's show. You can check out his show, Pediatric Sports Medicine Podcast, anywhere you get your podcast. That said, don't want to miss any episodes in the future. Go to YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts and search for the RVA Running Man podcast and subscribe. I appreciate the support of each and every last one of you. Until next week, friends, please be safe on the roads and trails. I'll talk to you later. Peace.